step back.
Let's think about this song. The song that you like.
Well, could you sing me a special song, please?
I sure will.
Don't Cry Daddy or Let Me.
But then in the middle of the concert, Elvis suddenly stopped. His eyes caught sight of a frail 7-year-old child in the front row, battling a terrible illness. What happened next silenced the crowd, turned whispers into tears, and became one of the most emotional moments in concert history. Stay with us. This was a night no one who was there would ever forget. The roar of the crowd. The night was alive long before Elvis Presley stepped onto the stage. It was sometime in the mid-1970s, and the arena was already bursting with excitement. Fans had begun to gather hours before the show, filling every seat, every aisle, every corner of the place. Outside, the air buzzed with voices, laughter, and the sound of people singing Elvis songs while waiting for the doors to open. Inside, the stage shimmered beneath the lights, and the smell of popcorn and perfume mixed with the hum of thousands of conversations. It felt like the world had stopped just to be here in this single moment, waiting for the king of rock and roll. When the lights dimmed, a soft murmur rolled through the audience. Flashing cameras painted bright bursts across the sea of faces. Fans held up handmade signs with glittering letters that read, "We love you, Elvis, and the King forever." Some had come dressed in rhinestone jackets and bell-bottom pants, their hair teased high, their hearts pounding with anticipation. The air grew warmer, heavier, filled with the kind of energy that only comes once in a lifetime. Even the security guards smiled as they looked out over the crowd. Everyone knew they were about to witness something special, though no one could have guessed just how unforgettable this night would become. Something extraordinary was waiting behind that curtain. Something that would make even Elvis Presley stop singing before the night was over. Then, with a sudden burst of sound, the band struck the first note. Thousands of voices blended into one giant cry of joy. Cameras flashed endlessly, and for a few moments, no one could even hear the music. Elvis smiled that familiar smile, the one that made people melt. He waved to the audience, his eyes full of warmth and life. His hair shone dark under the lights, and every movement seemed effortless, smooth, almost otherworldly. He lifted the microphone and began to sing, his voice filling the arena like thunder wrapped in velvet. The sound was powerful yet gentle, rich and full of emotion. Every song was a celebration. He sang CC Rider, his hips moving in that iconic rhythm that once caused television cameras to film him only from the waist up. Then came Burning Love, and the crowd rose to their feet, clapping, shouting, dancing. The floor trembled with the rhythm of thousands moving as one. His band matched his energy, every beat of the drums echoing through the hearts of the fans. Elvis laughed between songs, tossing scarves to the front rows and wiping sweat from his face with quick, playful gestures. Each time he smiled, it sent a ripple of excitement through the crowd. He was the king, and everyone in the building knew they were part of something they would never see again. His charm reached the farthest seat, his voice echoing off the rafters and returning in waves of adoration. Fans leaned over the barriers trying to get closer, some crying from pure joy. Cameras flashed non-stop, capturing every gesture, every step. Elvis pointed toward sections of the crowd, giving a nod here, a wink there. It felt personal, like he was singing just for each person in the room. Behind all the lights and noise, though, something softer seemed to linger in the air. Maybe it was the way his eyes sometimes searched the audience, pausing for just a second longer than expected. Maybe it was the faint tremble in his voice when he began Love Me Tender. No one paid much attention to it then, too lost in the magic of the music. But later, people would remember that look, that fleeting moment when Elvis seemed to see something beyond the lights. He moved through his set list like a man born to rule a stage. Jailhouse Rock, Hound Dog, all shook up. Each song brought louder cheers. The crowd was on its feet, a living ocean of sound and motion. Women reached for him, men shouted his name, and children danced in the aisles. Every eye in the place was fixed on him. Still, as the final chords of another song faded, a quietness began to settle. It was the kind of stillness that only comes before something unexpected. The air shifted, almost uneasy, like a gentle warning of what was about to come, and what happened shocked the world. Stay with us. The little child. Near the front row of the massive crowd sat a small boy named Danny. He was only 7 years old, small for his age, with soft brown hair that barely covered his pale forehead. His face carried the fragile look of someone who had fought too long against something far too strong. Yet his eyes, bright, round, and full of wonder, shone like tiny stars beneath the lights of the arena. In his trembling hands, he held a small cardboard sign, carefully written in thick red letters that said, "I love you, Elvis." It was uneven, the handwriting of a child, but the message was full of heart. Danny had been sick for a long time. The doctors had told his parents that his illness was severe, a kind of leukemia that left his body weak and tired. The long hospital days had drained him, but through it all, one thing had never changed: his love for Elvis Presley. He had watched Elvis on television whenever he could, clapping softly from his hospital bed, pretending to strum an invisible guitar. He dreamed of seeing the king perform live, even just once, to hear that voice that made him feel alive. His parents had promised him that dream. His father, a quiet man with weary eyes, had worked double shifts just to get the tickets. His mother spent weeks arranging the trip, packing his medicine and making sure he was strong enough to travel. They knew the journey would be hard, but they also knew it might be their son's last big adventure. That night was not just another concert for them. It was a gift, one final memory to hold on to. When they entered the arena, the crowd's energy nearly lifted Danny from his seat. Thousands of people cheered, laughed, and sang along to the music playing through the speakers. The lights flashed across the audience like stars dancing in the night. To Danny, it all felt magical. His heart raced faster than it had in months, not from sickness, but from pure excitement. His mother kept a gentle hand on his shoulder, afraid he might get too tired. Her eyes followed every movement, every breath, as if memorizing him. His father tried to smile, but the corners of his mouth quivered slightly. Behind that smile hid the ache of knowing time was slipping away. Still, they didn't let their sorrow show. Tonight, everything was about joy, about giving their little boy a moment that pain could never take away. As the lights dimmed and the first notes of the band echoed through the arena, Danny sat up straighter. His small hand gripped the edge of his sign. Around him, people screamed, waved, and clapped, but his gaze stayed fixed on the stage. When Elvis finally appeared in his shining white jumpsuit, Danny's mouth fell open in pure amazement. The man he had seen only on television was right there, real and alive, only a few steps away. The music began, powerful and thrilling. The crowd was on its feet, but Danny stayed seated, too weak to stand for long. Still, his spirit danced with every beat. His mother wiped her tears before they could fall. She didn't want her son to see her cry. The lights reflected in Danny's eyes as he lifted his sign high above his head, his arms shaking slightly from effort. The people near him noticed. Some smiled kindly, some whispered softly. The little boy with the sign drew quiet glances from strangers who didn't even know his name. They saw the tubes tucked gently beneath his jacket, the way his father kept one steadying arm around him, and the way his mother never looked away. But no one said a word. They just let him have his moment. The song that stopped the show. The music changed as the night reached its softest moment. The crowd had been cheering, dancing, and clapping for almost an hour, their voices echoing through the giant arena. Then the lights dimmed again, and Elvis Presley stepped back toward the microphone, holding his guitar close. He gave a small nod to the band, and the first few gentle notes of "Love Me Tender" floated into the air. The noise faded to silence. Thousands of fans sat down, their hearts slowing, their eyes fixed on the man in white standing beneath the warm golden light. Elvis began to sing, his voice rich and low, every word full of feeling. The song moved like a soft breeze across the room. People swayed quietly in their seats, some holding hands, some wiping away small tears. It was one of those rare moments when time seemed to pause. The king of rock and roll wasn't just performing. He was pouring his heart into every note. But halfway through the song, something stirred near the front row. Elvis's eyes, sharp even through the glare of the spotlight, caught a small movement that didn't match the rhythm of the crowd. He slowed his strumming, his voice hesitating for just a second. At first, no one noticed. Then he tilted his head, squinting slightly. You could almost hear the sound of people breathing. 18,000 faces turned toward the front rows, following the king's gaze. Elvis lowered his microphone slowly, his expression calm but filled with concern. The bright light. Elvis looked down and saw the boy, tiny, pale, wrapped in his mother's arms. The small sign he had been holding earlier now rested on his lap. His mother clutched his hand tightly, her face wet with tears, her other hand trembling as she tried to comfort him. His father stood behind her, his arm around them both, trying to stay strong. Without saying a word, Elvis unhooked his guitar strap and placed the instrument gently on its stand. The band members exchanged glances but stayed silent, their instruments still. Every sound in the arena faded, leaving only a deep, heavy quiet that seemed to press against every heart. Then Elvis began to walk. Slowly, carefully, he stepped down from the small platform at the center of the stage, moving toward the edge until he stood directly above the family. The light followed him, and for a moment the crowd could see his face clearly, gentle, solemn, full of compassion. He knelt down, lowering himself so he was closer to the child. The mother looked up at him with disbelief, her lips trembling, unable to speak. The boy opened his eyes, weak but bright, as if seeing something he had only dreamed of. Elvis smiled softly, a small, kind smile that carried more emotion than any song could. He said a few words, simple, warm, filled with love and strength. Words meant only for that little boy. He reached for the scarf around his neck, a white one lined with silver threads, and slowly placed it around the boy's shoulders. The boy's fingers moved weakly to touch it, and for a brief second, a faint smile crossed his face. It was fragile, but it lit up the room like sunlight through a window. The moment broke something open in everyone watching. Tears began to fall quietly across the crowd. Grown men wiped their faces. Women held each other's hands. The sound of quiet sobbing replaced the roar that had filled the stadium just minutes before. Even the band members looked down, their eyes glistening under the lights. The camera flashes started again, but this time, they weren't for excitement. They were for remembrance. Each burst of light felt like a heartbeat, marking a moment no one wanted to forget. Every flash captured the king kneeling before a child, a picture of kindness and humanity that would live on far beyond the music. Elvis spoke again, his voice low, steady, and full of care. He told the boy to keep being brave, that he was loved, that he was strong. The boy blinked slowly, still smiling. His mother nodded, covering her mouth to hold back her sobs. The father placed his hand over his heart, as if to thank the man on the stage who had just stopped everything for their child. For a long while, no one moved. The arena that had been bursting with life now felt like a sacred space. The noise of 18,000 people had turned into the soft sound of shared emotion. Every person there knew they were witnessing something rare, something pure. Finally, Elvis stood again, taking one last look at the boy before lifting his microphone. He signaled gently to the band. The music returned, slow and tender, as he began to sing the rest of Love Me Tender with a voice trembling with emotion. The lyrics carried deeper meaning now, each word filled with the weight of the moment that had just unfolded. But that wasn't all. There was still a burden in his heart. What did he do next? Stick around. The music stopped. For a long moment, the entire arena stood frozen. The bright stage lights still glowed, but the sound that had once shaken the walls was gone. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, stood quietly at the edge of the stage, his eyes resting on the frail little boy in the front row. The music had stopped. The crowd had stopped. And even time seemed to pause. Only the faint sound of people softly sniffling filled the air, a gentle echo of the emotion spreading through the room. No one dared to speak. The energy that had once exploded in cheers and laughter now melted into something tender and deep. The boy sat in his mother's arms, his small body wrapped in the white scarf Elvis had just placed around his shoulders. His face was pale, but he was still smiling, his eyes locked on the man who had made his dream come true. Elvis stayed silent for a few seconds longer, taking a deep breath as he looked across the sea of faces before him. Then, in a calm and steady voice, he asked everyone to join him in a quiet moment for the brave little boy sitting before them. He didn't need to say more. His tone alone carried all the love and sorrow the crowd could feel. Slowly, 18,000 people bowed their heads. The arena, which had moments ago roared with excitement, now fell into a silence so complete it felt almost unreal. Not a sound came from the seats, not even a whisper. Every fan, every guard, every member of the band stood still. The silence became a living thing, heavy yet peaceful, wrapping the entire space in a feeling of unity and compassion. Tears streamed down faces across the audience. Grown men who had shouted and danced earlier now wiped their eyes quietly. Women clutched tissues, unable to look away from the small figure in the front row. Even the security guards, who were trained to stay alert and detached, lowered their heads in respect. The band members turned away, pretending to adjust their instruments, hiding their own tears. It was no longer just a concert. It was a moment of humanity, shared by thousands who didn't know each other but were connected by the same emotion. The lights reflected off the silver details of Elvis's suit, glinting like small stars in the stillness. Somewhere in the crowd, a single sob broke the silence, followed by another, and then the sound faded again into that sacred quiet. The atmosphere felt almost holy. The fans could feel something greater than the music, a deep kindness that filled the room and held everyone together. The noise of the world outside no longer existed. All that mattered was this one small boy and the man who had stopped everything for him. The silence stretched on, lasting only seconds but feeling like eternity. No one wanted it to end. When Elvis finally lifted his head again, his face was calm but his eyes glistened under the stage lights. The crowd slowly followed his lead, raising their heads, some whispering prayers under their breath, others simply holding their hands to their hearts. The night the king wept. The hall remained silent for a moment longer, the echo of stillness heavy in the air. Then Elvis reached for his microphone again, his face pale under the soft stage lights. He took a deep breath, his eyes glancing once more toward the front row, where the little boy sat wrapped in the scarf he had just given him. The child's small face glowed with a faint smile, his fragile frame still, yet filled with peace. Elvis swallowed hard, trying to find his voice. When he finally spoke, his words trembled with emotion. He said softly, "This one's for you, little man." Then he turned to the band, nodded slowly, and the first gentle notes began to play. It was "You'll Never Walk Alone," one of the most powerful songs of hope and strength he had ever performed. As the melody filled the hall, every sound seemed to carry a different weight. The crowd, once loud with cheers and laughter, now sat in complete stillness. Elvis's voice broke through the silence, rich, soulful, and trembling with feeling. The boy, little Danny, closed his eyes, his small hand resting on his mother's. His breathing was shallow, but there was peace on his face. His lips moved slightly, trying to follow the words. His parents could barely hold back their tears. They had never seen him so calm, so full of quiet joy. Elvis's voice rose higher, strong and tender at the same time. There were moments when it cracked, when he had to pause just for a second to gather himself. He looked at the boy, then up toward the heavens and continued to sing. Every note carried warmth, like a message of love sent straight from his heart. Around the arena, people began to cry openly. Some held hands, others leaned into one another for comfort. Even the security guards, who were supposed to remain professional, were wiping their eyes. The band members kept playing, their heads bowed, their fingers trembling on the instruments. When the chorus came, the crowd began to sing too, thousands of voices joining Elvis's. Their singing wasn't loud or perfect. It was soft, shaking, full of emotion. The sound of 18,000 people singing together for one little boy filled the air like a wave of love. It wasn't a concert anymore. It was a moment of humanity. As the final line echoed, "You'll never walk alone," Elvis's voice broke completely. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and lowered the microphone. The music faded. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't shout. They simply stood in silence, their tears falling, their hearts heavy, yet full. Elvis looked down at Danny again. The boy opened his eyes just enough to smile. It was small, soft, but radiant. The kind of smile that said everything words couldn't. Elvis pressed his hand to his heart and nodded. It was his way of saying goodbye, his way of sending love without speaking. He turned to his band, whispered something quietly, and stepped away from the spotlight. The applause that followed was not the usual roar of excitement. It was gentle, respectful, a sound filled with sorrow and gratitude. People clapped with tears streaming down their faces. Backstage, Elvis sat alone for a while, his head in his hands. He was still in his white jumpsuit, but the sparkle had faded under the weight of what had just happened. One of his team members approached, unsure what to say. Elvis simply looked up and asked them to find the boy's parents. He wanted to make sure the family knew how much their son had touched him, how deeply that little moment had changed something inside him. Later, as people left the arena, they whispered to one another, still shaken. Many said they had never seen anything so moving in their lives. Some called their families as soon as they got home, trying to describe it, though words felt too small. The next morning, the story spread everywhere. Newspapers and radio stations reported what had happened, calling it the night the king wept. But for those who were there, it wasn't about Elvis's tears or the performance. It was about a connection. One moment when music and love met in the same breath. The echo that never faded. In the days that followed that unforgettable night, the story spread quietly but powerfully across the country. Those who had been there could not stop talking about it. Newspapers printed short pieces about Elvis's moment with the little boy, and radio hosts spoke with emotion about what had happened. But behind the headlines, away from the cameras and the crowd, Elvis's heart remained heavy. He couldn't forget the boy's small, glowing face, Danny sitting in the front row, clutching the scarf he had given him. That moment stayed with him long after the lights went down. Elvis asked one of his team members to get in touch with the family. He wanted to know how the child was doing and if there was anything he could do to help. Within a few days, he sent gifts, soft toys, flowers, and a handwritten note. It wasn't a public gesture. He didn't want attention for it. He simply wanted to remind the boy and his parents that they were loved and remembered. Danny's condition worsened in the weeks that followed. Doctors had warned the family that time was short, but his mother said he held on with quiet strength. Whenever he was awake, he would talk about that night, how Elvis had looked at him, how he had sung just for him. That memory became his comfort. Even when he was too weak to speak, he would hold the scarf tightly in his hands, smiling faintly whenever his parents mentioned Elvis. For his parents, that single evening had given them something priceless, the memory of their son's joy. His mother later shared that it was the happiest she had seen him in months. She said that Elvis had given her boy something medicine never could: hope. It was a moment that filled their final days together with light instead of pain. Letters began to pour in from fans all over the world. They wrote to Elvis thanking him for what he had done. Many said they were moved to tears hearing how he stopped everything to show kindness to one small boy. Some told him that the story had inspired them to be more compassionate in their own lives. People who had been at the concert wrote about the silence that filled the arena, how it felt like everyone shared the same heartbeat that night. They called it the night 18,000 cried as one. Elvis read many of those letters himself. He rarely responded publicly, but those words touched something deep within him. He had always been a man with great compassion, but after that night, something inside him changed. His shows took on a different tone. He began to sing more gospel songs, pouring his heart into every note. Songs about faith, love, and mercy became more common in his performances. He spoke more about gratitude, about kindness, and about the importance of love that went beyond fame or wealth. He also became more generous with his time and money. Elvis had always been known for helping others quietly, but after meeting Danny, his giving grew deeper. He donated to children's hospitals, supported families in need, and often sent gifts anonymously to those who were struggling. He told his close circle that sometimes one small act of kindness could change a person's life forever, and he believed that more than ever. The story of that concert never faded. Decades later, fans who had been there still remembered it clearly. They would tell their children and grandchildren about the night the king of rock and roll stopped everything to show love to a dying boy. They remembered the hush that fell over the crowd, the sound of thousands crying softly together, and the sight of Elvis walking off the stage with tears in his eyes. For them, that moment revealed the true man behind the legend. Elvis Presley was not just a singer or an icon that night. He was a man with a heart wide enough to hold the sorrow of one small child and the love of thousands. He reminded everyone that compassion is the most powerful kind of music. The years went on, but the memory of that night never grew old. It became part of Elvis's legacy. Not the gold records, not the sold-out shows, but that single act of grace that spoke louder than any song. The music stopped that night, but what Elvis did sang louder than words could ever say. In one small act of kindness, the king reminded the world what love truly means. And though the boy's life was short, his story lived on, carried in the hearts of everyone who was there, and in the quiet soul of the man who once stopped the world to sing for him. What do you think about Elvis's concert? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more celebrity gist. Before you go, watch the other videos on your screen.